G'day expats, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Expat Chat. Today, I'm joined with one of our specialist financial planners, Mutton Jack, who is with me in the APAC office on the beautiful Gold Coast. Good morning, Mutton. How are you?
Good morning, James. Doing well over on this side. Good to be back for another episode.
Absolutely, mate. We're going to keep getting you on here more and more. At the moment, for those that are tuning in or watching us on YouTube, Brett is on leave. I feel like he's been on leave forever now. He's still enjoying himself on holidays. I think he's, again, trying to escape the heat that everyone experiences over in the Middle East. Those 50-degree days, I wouldn't be able to do it, to be honest. The road would be pretty much melting, I imagine.
Yep.
Um, but mate, today I wanted to pull you aside because we've had a lot of questions that's been dropped in our Facebook group. So quick shout out to the Facebook group, Australian Expat Financial Forum. Really enjoying all the community and all the back and forth from the Aussies that are in that group. A lot of questions being answered by everyone as well. It's always great to see. But there's a couple that the members have thrown up to us. So I thought we'd run through it. But mate, before we get into it, let's keep the compliance managers and solicitors of the world very happy. So any information you hear today on today's podcast should be considered as general in nature. It's not personal tax or personal financial advice. If you do need that kind of advice, make sure you reach out to a qualified and certified and licensed financial advisor or tax accountant or lawyer to ensure you're getting the correct advice and make sure they are match fit and they work with Australian expats. Now, mate, let's jump into it. I want to pick your brain based on this Q&A. And again, really appreciate all the expats jumping into that Facebook forum, that Facebook group and throwing these out. I thought we'd start with one that I know you've come across a lot probably in the last 12
hmm
months, and that's the US exit tax. I know you've been working with a lot of your clients to help navigate that space. And often I think I see in the group people throw out what's this US exit tax that has. So
Mm.
I thought it'd be good for you just to run us through high level. What is the US exit tax? Who does it apply to?
Yeah. I've definitely been running into this more so lately. I think just everything that's going on here in the US, it's seems to be a lot more people are coming back to Australia or calling it quits over there, or even just restructures in their own internal companies with the massive tech layoffs that are
Mm.
happening and government sort of changes. So. Uh, as a result, yeah, this is a conversation that's popping up quite a lot. So what it is, it's essentially a global exit tax event on all of your wealth. And that sounds, or it is as bad as it sounds, really. So essentially, what they do is they'll grab if you've got a property in Australia and it's gone up by $1 million. If you're deemed what's called a covered expatriate, then you have to pay taxes on the growth of that property. So if it's $1 million in capital appreciation, capital gains, or unrealized capital gains, you're paying taxes as if you physically sold those investments. Same for sort of specific types of retirement accounts, as they can see them as sort of distributions. There's a lot of exclusions around sort of some deferred type of retirement accounts, but some aren't seen as a deferred type of retirement account. So then you're basically paying taxes. You receive that entire retirement account balance as an ordinary income. And that
Mm.
goes for your shares, any crypto holdings you have, all of your assets, really. So really, really, really nasty if you are deemed a covered expatriate. Now, to determine whether or not you are a covered expatriate, there's really three tests, and you have to pass one of the three tests to be deemed a
Mhm.
covered expatriate. So the first one, which is probably the one that most people get concerned with, is the the net worth test. So if your net worth is greater than $2 million USD, then you're deemed a covered expatriate. So
Mhm.
that's all of your net worth all combined, essentially. Now, the second one is your average tax liability. If your average tax liability, it's just been indexed, it's $201,000 USD over the last 5 years. That means you're earning around that $500,000 salary over in the US or thereabouts every single year for the last 5 years, or at least on average, then you're deemed a covered expatriate. And the last one's a tax compliance test for people who have just been burying their head in the sand with all their foreign account reporting or whatever it might be, then that one might scare you. But if you haven't been compliant over the last 5 years, then you again pass that test and now you're deemed a covered expatriate. And this global exit tax event applies across all of your assets.
God, it's an absolute minefield. And what is unique about those tests for our listeners is there has been indexation that's been applied to the tax liability test, but funnily enough, for some reason, that net worth test, that 2 million USD per an individual, hasn't changed for a number of years, which seems strange because share markets are going up every year. Property market usually is going up every year. And even the rate at which you're paid and your income is also going up every year based on inflation and wage price indexation. So I don't know why the US hasn't really moved the needle or moved the dial there on the net worth test because they need to. If they applied the same kind of indexation that they had on, I believe, the tax liability test, I think it'd be over 3 million now, the USD.
Mm,
So it is very punitive. I've seen a lot of cases that Martin's been working on, I would say the last 12 months, where he's helped a lot of his clients navigate that space. And it's usually a sort of 2 to 3 year plan to be able to reduce the impact of the exit tax and coming back and repatriating the right manner as well. So if you think you're going to be caught out, please reach out. Martin's been handling a lot of that within the firm right now. So but it's a
mm.
big minefield, absolutely.
Yeah, I think probably just worth flagging as well. It doesn't apply if you've just held your green card for a very short period of time. So there's that time that you just mentioned, right? A 3-year time frame until you hit the sort of 8-year mark. So if you've
Mm.
held your green card for a period of 8 years over the last 15, you'd be considered a long-term resident, and therefore, that's when you apply the test. So if you're at that 4-year mark and you're thinking, oh, I'm probably going to come back to Australia or leave the US in the next few years, well, that's the time to start thinking about it, because that's the time that we need to start potentially restructuring your assets or gifting assets or, whatever it might be to reduce your tax liability or reduce your total net worth from individual ownership and spreading it across family members, whatever it might be as part of that strategy. So you do have a bit of time, but if you're over that 8 years, then yep, the 3 tests are going to apply. And then if you pass on those tests, then, you know, you're limited really.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. So good question there, Brian Keogh. Thank you for that one. Move on to another one from Dave Ollie. I might grab this one. When I left Australia, I paused my private health insurance cover, which allowed a pause for up to 3 years. Yep, pretty common with a lot of private health insurance funds. Not sure what happens after 3 years and what the implications will be when I return to Australia. So I'll grab this one. When you do leave and you're leaving for a permanent role overseas for a number of years, you can contact your private health insurance provider and usually put your health insurance on hold for usually 2 to 3 years. It just means you're not paying any premiums, but you're still in their system, essentially. After 3 years, there are some funds which will allow you to pay essentially another month's worth of premiums, and they'll keep you in there for another 2 to 3 years. And, it just depends on the health provider, the health insurance provider. Now, that's not the end of the world. If you come back, say, 10 or 15 years later, and because you haven't been here for a number of years with private health insurance, it's very common that the private health insurance fund will want to apply the lifetime health cover loading on you. But that's okay. You can navigate that very easily. You just need to request and submit a passenger movement card request to the Department of Home Affairs, which essentially have your passport history, which will show that you've actually been out of Australia for a number of years. And by doing so, the private health insurance fund will actually remove the lifetime health cover loading. So that's really common. We do see a lot of expats when they return and they engage us to help clean up their overseas affairs and bring it home, that automatically the private health insurance providers might apply a loading on there, which can be an extra 50 to 100% of the premium, which is a huge amount because you actually have to pay it for the next 10 years essentially. So we do help them try and navigate that space with that passive movement card. But good question, Dave. But not the end of the world if you're not in there for the next 3 years. And when you come back, it's something that we can help you with and manage that as well. So great question. Another question here from T.E. Bird. Super contributions from a board, limits, etc. What are they? Can you run us through the different types of contributions and our options? Martin, I'm going to kick that one over to you.
Happy to. The first thing to acknowledge is that super is agnostic with your tax residency status. So they do not care where you are. You could be in the US, you could be in Dubai, you could be in the UK. It does not matter. Australia will treat super the exact same. Now, one of the sort of caveats to that is, a self-managed super fund because they have some extra requirements and some extra tests that are involved. But because super is agnostic with your tax residency status, that means that the contributions don't change. So there's concessional contributions and after-tax contributions, which are non-concessional. The concessional is naturally pre-tax. So let's start with the pre-tax. So concessional, the annual contribution cap is $30,000 a year. Now, when those contributions go into super, they're taxed at 15%. So if you're making those type of contributions, well, you're paying 15% and you'd want to be claiming that contribution as a tax deduction against something. But if you've got no Australian income because you're living over in Dubai or overseas and you have no income here, well, now you're just paying 15% super tax for absolutely no reason. So a very common approach might be, if I've got property income, well, I know that that's going to be taxed at non-resident tax rate of 30%. So maybe I want to add to super, claim that as a tax deduction, and then I'm saving the difference between my non-resident tax rates of 30% and then the super tax rate of 15%. So concessional contributions, no change, annual cap $30,000. You can trigger the carry forward rule. The carry forward rule essentially just allows you to carry forward the last 5 years worth of unused concessional contribution caps. So if you haven't been in Australia for a long time, haven't added for the last 5 years, you'd have the entire cap available. So, that's in this financial year, 137,500. Then you get the current cap as well of $30,000. So you've technically, in that scenario, got 167,500, which you could claim as one big fat tax deduction if you had maybe a big capital gains tax event back in Australia.
Yep,
Flipping
massive.
massive opportunity even when you come back as well and maybe start earning Australian employment income. If you flip that one though on its head and you've got the non-concessional contribution. Now that's made with after-tax contributions. This one's a lot more friendly because you've already paid taxes. You're not getting any immediate tax benefits. So the annual contribution cap for that is $120,000. That was indexed just recently. That is basically a pretty healthy cap. But what you can trigger is the bring forward rule. And what that will allow you to do is bring forward the next 2 years of contribution caps. So you could do this current $120,000, next year's $120,000, and then the following year's $120,000 and make a very large contribution of $360,000. But I suppose the caveat for that is, well, now you can't add for the next 2 years of after-tax contributions because you've already used up those caps. That sort of limits you there.
Yeah, absolutely. God, there's so many options there, isn't there? I know, obviously, the downsizer. I mean, the downsizer
Yeah.
contribution is one which I guess we don't see too much because it's a lot of the time expats have been overseas, but I know you helped a client recently with pretty much a contribution strategy which covered everything because you're able to use the
Yeah.
recent far closure of the financial year. So like the June one that you did, and then obviously everything's going in right now. Can you give us some insight into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, these clients just came back to Australia. We actually were looking to sell a property, but the first one is, if you come back and you're towards the end of a financial year, well, you could contribute $120,000 in June. You could also make a tax deductible contribution. So for these individuals, they had a large income. So now they triggered that carry forward rule, the 120 non-concessional plus the last 5 years worth of unused concessional contributions and the FY25 cap as well. So 120 plus 167,500 each. And then July ticked over. Now we've gone $360,000. Now that's per person, so per couple as well. And then the downsizer contribution. So how this works is, well, if you've moved into a former main residence that you've had for a period of up to 10 years and you tick off the eligibility requirements, well, now you can trigger the downsizer contribution strategy, and that allows you to put in an extra $300,000 per individual of that the sale proceeds of that property that do not count towards either of the caps as well. So it's just sort of a separate silo cap as well, which is fantastic. So I haven't added the numbers up straight away. I don't know if you've been doing that in the background, but it's a large amount.
I have been. The catch-up concessional, I just love that opportunity to offset capital gains and fix it at 15%. And I know for these clients of yours, they hadn't really done much with their super. So their super balances were
Mm,
under that 500K threshold, which is important. And then the other benefit was because they're coming back and essentially retiring very soon, that they're very close to 60. So I guess for the downsizer, making sure you're at least 55 or over. So these clients, they were able to squirrel in, and squirrel is probably the best way to put it, after tax, about 1.79 or 1.8 million essentially into both super funds in total. And then if they're getting about 5% on that total amount in super, which they should be, that's achievable on any sort of super fund balance growth, high growth, then that should generate nearly 90K in income a year on top of their other retirement assets where shares and other things, and even overseas pensions
mm,
and other things. So, and that's without digging into the capital, that 90,000 on that 1.8. So, um, terrific strategy, screwed so much
mm.
into a concessionally taxed environment, and then when they convert it all into pension mode, it's all then tax free. I guess the only drawback is, or the only disadvantage with using the bring forward rule is just, okay, then you now need to wait another 2 financial years until they can start recontributing back into their super. But at least they've still got the ability to put in 30,000 as a concessional, offset any other further income
Mhm.
gains, those sort of things for the next couple of years. But God, it's a great way to get a chunky amount into super.
It's crazy. I think that what blows my mind with that strategy is the time in which you can do it. You could get that much money into super over really June, July, 2 months, or you've got
Yeah.
90 days for the downsizer. So, 3 months maximum, done. All
Yep.
in, hit the retirement, convert it to pension, start drawing it down tax free. It's fantastic at that stage. And you enter retirement. Maybe if not specific to these clients, but if you're overseas and you come back and you've got this massive share portfolio because you haven't been out into a retirement account,
Mm.
such as, you've been working in maybe a more tax favored area where it's better to grow an investment portfolio, or you come back, that cost base is reset. So, you basically just got this big wad of cash that you can
Mm.
instantly move into, a large chunk of it into the more tax effective environment of super. So yeah, blows my mind.
Absolutely, man. And I mean, another question here on super, which somewhat ties in nicely, from James Shah. Appreciate the question. Once you reach preservation age, is there any, or is there, sorry, is there still any tax on withdrawing your super if you're not an Australian tax resident at the time, even if there would have been no tax if you're a resident? So you're a non-resident, you've met your preservation age, you start to access super. Like, how's super treated from a tax point of view?
Yeah, yeah. Links back to my earlier point. It's agnostic. So they don't care. And if
Yep.
there's no withholding tax when you drew the funds out, if you were in Australia, well, if they don't care that you're overseas, they're not going to have withholding tax withdrawn. So, that's why super, even if you are an expat, having a healthy super balance is really important because one, it continues to grow tax favored. So you got 15% tax rate, long-term tax rate of 10%. You get franking credit refunds if you're in the right superannuation administration structure. And this is all in accumulation phase. You meet that preservation age, convert it to pension phase. You draw it out, tax-free, no withholding tax, but also the income, the dividends, the capital gains, the franking credits inside of pension phase. Well, it's no longer at a tax-favored tax rate. It's completely tax-free. So you're getting all of that refunded internally of that retirement account, and then you're drawing those funds out completely tax-free, no withholding taxes whatsoever. For Australia, obviously the other side of the coin there is, to consider the local residency and the tax
Mm.
treatment of super distributions.
Absolutely, absolutely. And right now, a big contention in Parliament at the moment, especially in the Senate, is that Division 296 tax, which is
Mm,
essentially taxing on the growth of super balances over 3 million. They want to obviously get that tweaked or changed, maybe applying indexation to the balance. So
mhm,
we'll see where that one lands, but there's plenty of other opportunities that'll be available to us to navigate that space and remain tax efficient using family trust or using a bucket company strategy.
mm,
Um, I know some people love to use investment bonds, and investment bonds in Australia are very different to the bonds that you have overseas. I hate the ones overseas because they're poor performers, and the fees and the conflict of remuneration is just ridiculous. But we'll do another episode on that one another time. So good question there from James. That's great, mate. Sam KS, how does getting medical insurance work as an expat returning to AU after 10 years? So, well, this actually dovetails nicely into the one that I answered before about private health insurance. So, Sam, when you come back to Australia, you can apply for private health insurance, but because you've been overseas for a number of years, it's very common that they'll try and apply the lifetime health cover loading. So again, you'll need to get your passenger movement card history from the Department of Home Affairs just to show that you've been overseas that entire time. Technically speaking, you can be a non-resident but be back in Australia for up to just over 1,000 days through that period that you're a non-resident without an appropriate level of private health insurance cover, without them applying the lifetime health cover loading. So that's nearly just over 3 years nearly. So with that in mind, you've got plenty of time to be back and forth in Australia. But yes, usually passenger movement card with that application will ensure that you don't get the lifetime health cover loading. And then when it comes to choosing private health insurance, it's not really an advice area that we touch, to be honest, because it's completely up to you. You know, using Compare the Market and those sort of platforms are a good way to look into it, depending on your health history, your family dynamic, all those sort of things is important, which goes into the decision. But good general question there to tie into the other one. We've got another question, probably one more question from Naz. Hello, just wanted advice if expats are better off investing in property or shares in Australia. So we won't give specific personal advice, but we'll give you, I guess, our opinion on the two and the tax side as well. So Martin, I'll throw that one over to you.
Sure thing. I reckon I get asked this question maybe 5 times a week, once a day probably, from
Yeah.
different new expats or even just family members, to be honest, or friends and family. You know, do I invest in the share market? Do I invest in property? It's very contentious. You know, there's definitely people who are pro shares and then pro property, and then you want to be usually a mix of both. When we overlay that with sort of the expat considerations, you know, what I consider first is your tax residency. You know, are you an Australian tax resident or are you a non-tax resident? If you're a non-tax resident of Australia, there's always the three core considerations I like to touch on. Number one, the main residence exemption. So if it's a former main residence, but you don't get that anymore if you were to sell your principal place of residence if you're living overseas, so you're a non-tax resident. This is important if you choose to retire whilst living overseas or you're spending a very long period of time overseas. The second one is probably the biggest one when it comes down to, is it a good investment? And that's the 50% capital gains tax discount. So this was abolished in 2012 for non-tax residents. So what that means is any period of ownership after May 8th, 2012, you don't get that 50% discount. So if we apply that to practical terms, you know, you buy an investment asset such as property to grow in value, and hopefully it performs fantastically. If I buy a $1 million property and it's performed fantastically in 5 or 7 years, it's now $2 million. I've made $1 million. Fantastic. But if that entire ownership period was as a non-tax resident, well, when I actually want to realize that gain and I want to put it into my retirement accounts, draw it down, sell it, upgrade my principal place of residence, or, you know, just fuel my retirement or whatever it might be, I'm going to lose basically half of that, because that entire $1 million gain will be taxable by the ATO, because I don't get to discount that. If I held that as an Aussie tax resident, well, I would discount that by 50% and only $500,000 would be taxable at my marginal tax rate. Now I'm going to eat into those lower thresholds a lot slower than if I had a $1 million gain where the top marginal tax rate is 47% with the Medicare levy. So you're looking at a pretty hefty tax bill or a fantastic asset that's grown whilst you're living overseas. So that's probably the biggest consideration. And then the next one is just the income coming from it. So it is still considered Australian sourced income. So rental income after all expenses, if it's positively geared, that will be declared as ordinary income, taxed at non-resident tax rates. So you're paying 30% on the very first dollar, then it goes up beyond that. So losing a third straight away of your income is never great, especially if it's part of your retirement, because there goes 30% of your rental yield and your retirement income. Now, overlaying that with shares, well, we know from a tax point of view, if shares are purchased as a non-tax resident, they grow capital gains tax exempt. So it's a very, very lucrative from a tax point of view, very liquid naturally. If you're comparing sort of returns, well, the share market historically over the last 10, 20 years has returned 9 to 12% in the big index funds. And then the Australian property market has returned 6.68% over the last 10 years, the Australian national average. So return percentages, yep, clearly there's a winner there. Now, costs involved as well. I'd say there's more costs involved with property. But this isn't all to paint a picture that shares are better, because property, I think, should be a part of everyone's strategy, where suitable. And that's because you get to utilize leverage a whole lot more. You can utilize the bank's money to buy a property and then get a 6.68% return on a very large property. That's, let's say, $1 million or $2 million, compared to the 20% down payment that you might have in a share portfolio. We've run the numbers a lot, and it really depends on the time frame that we spend overseas. If we're only overseas for a 1 year or 2 years, well, you don't get that 50% discount for that short period of time, but it's a drop in the bucket if you hold that property for 20 years. But if you're overseas for a very long period of time, well, maybe it could make more sense to invest in this tax-free portfolio, grow that, come back to Australia, reset the cost base, then go and purchase your future principal place of residence, go a little bit more heavy into the property exposure there. But if you're ever looking from a sort of return versus return perspective, no debt involved, no leverage involved, shares are always going to win based on those sort of historical returns there.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. You put that really well. And I think often when it comes to building wealth, we do come across a lot of high income earners overseas, but income alone doesn't build that wealth. And, it's definitely a tool that's going to help you build wealth, but building wealth comes from having some sort of structure in place, whether it's investing in some sort of property and having smart debt, automating investing into some sort of shares, making sure that, that structure is essentially an asset growth machine. It's an engine, and it's going to work for you for the next 20 years. Don't overcomplicate it and get it working for you. So often that's the case. We see a lot of clients that come to us. They might be starting, they've just moved overseas and they've got a great job. They've got RSUs, but not too much behind them just yet. Or they've got a great amount of savings from when they were in Australia, but now they're like, oh, well, how do I navigate this space? And it's like, okay, look, we've got the income. That's a good tool. We've got the RSUs that we can sell down. Let's now put some structure in place to be real wealth, serious wealth over the next 20 years, not the next 3 years. I feel like everyone wants to try and get rich quickly, but I think when we look at our client base and those clients which are truly very wealthy, it hasn't been done in the last couple of years. It's been done over the last 20 to 30 years. And,
That's
it's
right.
having good structure in place.
Yeah, and they're not getting rich from putting everything into the bank account from their high incomes. What's really growing their wealth is the compounding returns. Because if your wealth gets to a point, you have X amount of millions of dollars in your account, well, you can't out earn the compound return. If that account goes up by 10% because the markets were really favorable, even if you're a top level CEO earning $1 million and you've got a $10 million portfolio, you're not going to out earn that return consistently every single year. So the earlier you can start and build that initial wealth, the more those outsized compounding returns will be in those later years. And that's where the real money gets made. But you have to start somewhere, and you have to start getting the momentum by sticking to a good strategy, whether that's property, shares, superannuation. You build up these different silos of accounts, and then the compounding starts and it grows and it grows and it grows. And then you hit a point at one stage where you just simply are not, your investments are out earning you, essentially.
Absolutely, mate. Okay. Listen, we're riffing. We've gone off piste a little bit, but to our listeners, you can tell how passionate we are. We could talk about this for hours and hours, to be honest. But Matt, it's been great having you on for another episode. We'll wind up there. Quick shout out, bit of housekeeping as well. We've got a webinar coming up next week. It's on the 30th of July, Beyond the Basics. It's more for those that are dual nationals with the US or US based at the moment. We're talking about some advanced financial concepts and tax strategies. We've got a US accountant joining us on that one. In terms of time zones and what the time is going to look like, So San Francisco, 4 p.m, New York, 7 p.m on Wednesday, the 30th of July, Thursday, 31st of July for Australia, Australian Eastern Standard Time at 9 a.m. If you haven't registered, please jump on our events page on the website and register for the webinar. Outside of that, if you're not in the Australian Financial Facebook forum group just yet, the Australian Expat Financial Forum, I should say, jump in there, throw in your questions. And lastly, if you enjoy the podcast, tell your friends about it, as well as give us a like and a rating, because we do this for you. We love providing value. In the meantime, Martin, can't wait to have you on another episode. And thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks, Martin.